Welcome, everybody, to this month's Schuman Talk, where we discuss issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. We send this out on the 9th day of each month at 6 p.m. because on the May the 9th, 1950, at 6 p.m., the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house in which today 500 million Europeans live together in peace. This was the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched the European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. Schuman's vision for Europe was for a community of people deeply rooted in basic Christian values. He wanted to make war unthinkable for future generations. And in fact, there's been unprecedented peace between the EU member states ever since. As you can see from this graphic, that peace has been abnormal compared to war in the past. However, war fills our daily headlines again as the war waged by Putin's Russia against Ukraine is raging. And the international order created by international cooperation after World War II is being fundamentally challenged by Putin's doctrine of Ruski Mir. And so today we talk with Al and Carolyn Akimoff, who've been engaged with both Ukraine and Russia for over 50 years, about the past, the present, and the future of these two nations. They've been leading YWAM Slavic ministries as long as I've ever known them, which goes right back to the mid-70s. So welcome, Al and Carolyn. You're right now joining us from Salem in Oregon on the west coast of America. And we're very glad that you can come and join us. Although you live there, you are spending big chunks of the year, when COVID allows, in what was the former Soviet Union and communist countries of Eastern and Central Europe. And Al, particularly, you have a background that goes back to Ukraine. And we want to begin with the past. Although you were born in China and you were raised in America, your roots go right back to Ukraine. So tell us this amazing story about your family. It started in Ukraine, how you happened to be born in China, and how that led you to America. And then from there, you went back, indeed, to discover your family roots.
Yeah, Jeff, it's good to be with you. And yeah, it's true that it actually almost covers the last century of Ukrainian history, beginning with the revolution in the turn of the century, and that's actually where the story begins, with my grandparents living in Ukraine. They lived just a little south of what we've come to know and heard a lot recently about, Mykolaiv, the city. And
maybe we can have a map of Ukraine so we can track you as you're talking about these.
Yeah, here on the Black Sea, you see there the Crimea, and then just above that, Mykolaiv there. And
Next to Odessa,
yeah, next to Odessa. And so there, in fact, we recently made a trip there to discover or rediscover some of the villages from my mother and my grandparents. And they're kind of hard to find these days. The names have changed and all, but anyway, it goes back to the history of them, farmers, very typical Ukrainian family. Very, how would you say, religious in one sense, in that they've always believed in a God that was there, but sadly didn't know the God. In fact, they used to say that the Tsar lives in Moscow, but God, he's even further away. And so they were aware of him, but not close to him.
This is your father's house.
This is my grandfather.
My
and
grandfather's house, yes.
his family. And
Yeah.
so what happened was that at the turn of the century, a revival came, and it came by way of a little black church uh, in Los Angeles, and it happened to be on a street called Azusa, and the Holy Spirit uh, appeared in this church, and suddenly Acts chapter 2 came alive once again as the signs and wonders of Acts 2 became very prominent in this church, and this hadn't been known very much for some time, and so it was something that attracted literally the world to this little church, and it spread then to the world, and one of those places it spread to was Ukraine.
So
And it
you're
came,
describing the very beginning of the Pentecostal movement that went all around the world. Yeah.
exactly, and it came by way of a young man named Ivan Voronayev, a Ukrainian, who went to America and went there basically to get the American, be part of the American dream, and eventually became part of a far greater vision that God had for him and for Ukraine. But he encountered God and encountered this move of the Holy Spirit. And so for a short time, he pastored in New York and San Francisco, Seattle. And then the Lord spoke to him and said, "You take this message back to Ukraine." And so, in obedience, he took his family and they moved back to Ukraine, moved to Odessa, actually. And this became the center of that revival, which broke out through that whole part of Ukraine. And literally thousands of people were affected. They suddenly experienced the move of God, wonders, healings, and my grandfather was one of those. He was affected by this revival, got on a horse, and began to go back and forth to different villages, spreading this, and until one day the Lord spoke to him and said he needed to leave his home. And so they actually, he was one of the first to leave that area, and it was in a different way than most people left that area. He went actually sent out as a missionary to take this message to other parts of actually at that time it was already the Soviet Union. And so he went to a community of Cossacks, actually, and began to share this message. And the village he came to, they responded, and literally the whole village came to believe. He was arrested, put in prison, and miraculously released, and went back to the village. And they said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm packing up our stuff because we're leaving." He said, "Well, where are you leaving to?" He said, "Well, I don't know, but God said we're to move on, and we're moving on." And so the rest of the village said, "Well, if God told you to move on, we're moving on with you." So the whole village packed up and they left and started this journey, which eventually was to take them 25 years as they traveled through the Soviet Union and through China and eventually to America.
So Alan, when God spoke to him, it was not so much just like Abraham, he should go out, but these other people realized that God was warning him that now is the time to go because of things to come. Was this the time of Stalin?
This was the time of Stalin, and eventually, just after my grandfather left, uh, Stalin's fury hit the Ukraine, and it really hit with full impact. And this was when Stalin actually brought on this famine that was human caused. He actually took all the food out of Ukraine, all the grain,
We're talking about the 1930s.
that's right, the
It's all being
1930s.
repeated today.
And it was called the Holodomor, where literally millions of people died. And both my parents were actually orphaned at that time, and were taken in. My mother was taken in by my grandmother and grandfather, and went on this journey then with them. And her family was affected by this as well as my father's. And so it was a horrible, horrible time for Ukraine, as Stalin, not just with Ukraine, but the other nationalities, he tried to basically wipe them out, wipe their cultures, their language, as he's doing today in Ukraine. And this is being repeated. But yeah, thousands of people were displaced. He actually uprooted Ukrainians, sent them, spread them all through Siberia, the Far East, the Caucasus, all over the country, and then moved Russians into Ukraine. And he did this with the other countries as well. And so this explains some of the situation that's going on now of why you have so many Russians living in Ukraine, especially those eastern parts there, and the same in Latvia and Estonia, these other countries as well. There's a good percentage of Russians living in those places, and the others were those people were sent to these other places around the Soviet Union.
So, Al, what I hear you saying, there's a lot of parallels with what's going on right now. And just as Putin has his doctrine of Ruski Mir, Russian peace, really a greater Russia, and is rewriting history, Stalin had his own methods of doing that too. Can you tell us about that group of people that he particularly wanted to wipe out?
Yeah, it was actually, he hated Ukraine, and yeah, there was a number of reasons for that, with what happened with World War One, but anyway, yeah, he was basically creating this Ruski Mir as well, and obliterating the cultures, the languages. With Ukraine, one of the ways that the culture and the history was passed on to the next generations, it was through a group what they called the Kobzars. And when you were born blind in Ukraine, it wasn't necessarily considered a curse, but often these blind people were taken, and as children, they were taken in by these Kobzars, who were actually musicians. They played this instrument called the Kobzar, and that's why they were called the Kobzars. But this it was like a bandura today, but they would play this music, and in this they would recall the history, the stories of the past, and these were memorized through these songs, these epics that they would then share, and they would have the next generation of Kobzars were children born blind, and they were taken in by this group of Kobzars, these musicians, these bards, and the children then would learn these songs and the music and the history, but also they would go around and collect the food and money that was given to support this. So it's kind of an occupation that was passed on, and so the history was passed on through these bards, these Kobzars. Now Stalin, of course, wanted to obliterate the culture, the history. So at that time, he called a conference of these Kobzars in Moscow and brought them all together. And the majority of them came to this concert and literally were obliterated, killed during that time. Just a handful survived, but they were killed. And this was, again, Stalin's attempt to obliterate the culture. Now, the same thing was true.
The stories, yeah, the actual history of the country, because that's what these cub saws were doing, wasn't it? They were reminding people, they were the national memory, reminding people of who they were, their identity.
Exactly. The same thing was true of religion. And of course, Stalin was very, very opposed to religion, all religion. And so basically, he set out, he began with a 5-year plan to remove God from the land. And after that 5 years, started the next 5 years, and the next 5. So he had to continue to try to do that. But anyway, the first 5 years, he literally wiped out a number of churches, destroyed them, bombed them, turned them into barns, horse stables. So the churches were gone. The priests and pastors, like my grandfather, were arrested, put in prison. And so tremendous persecution came. Now, these people that I was telling you about of this revival in that part of Ukraine, they were spread out all over, and interesting stories came about. And I found these out later as I began to travel to these places. In my early years, we were involved with Bible smuggling and encouragement to the what they called the underground church at the time, and so one story is just a man that we met in Siberia, and he happened to be the bishop of many of the Pentecostal churches in that area. And he asked me one day, he said, "Do you want to hear my story of how I ended up here?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to hear that." He said, "Well," he said, "when I was just a teenager, 17 years old, I knew nothing about God, but someone invited me to a youth meeting, a Christian youth meeting. And so I went, and that night I became a Christian." He said, and also that night, the KGB came and arrested us. And I was sent here to Siberia, and I've been here ever since. He said, when we first came here, there was nothing here. We had to build our own dormitories, to cut down the logs and build our own places to live. Eventually, we're put in mines to work mining coal. He says, and as we did that, he says, they didn't give us any wood to gird up these mines, and so they would collapse. We would dig until it collapsed, and he said, and this went on, and people would die. And he said, but as we would dig, the Holy Spirit would speak to us and say, "Run!" And so we'd drop our shovels and we'd run, and it would cave in. Well, this happened a number of times, and after a while, the other miners said, "We will not go down there unless there's a Christian with us." Well, you can imagine, what would happen then as they were on the surface, just these miners then were saying, "Well, what about this? What's going on? Who keeps telling you to run? How do you know that it's going to collapse?" And so the gospel went forth through these places, and it was amazing because years later, as we traveled to all of those different areas, here was the church in these places, and to the present time in Russia, 70 to 80% of the churches are led by Ukrainian pastors, and this came about from those times when this revival continued to move through the Soviet Union.
Say that again, Al. What you're saying is, as a result of Stalin's exiling all these Christians across Siberia, we now have 70 to 80% of the churches there as a result of that movement, of his exile.
Yeah, it's incredible. And just a little side story to that. when things opened up in the Soviet Union, of course, we'd already been working somewhat with the underground church there, but they were hard to find, and I mean, they're spread out through these places where tourists couldn't go to, and so they're isolated, and Billy Graham had a conference in it was about 88, 89, maybe 1989, when things were just opening up. And he pulled together all the churches, pastors, that could come. So there's about 1,000 pastors that gathered in Moscow. And I was there at this meeting, and I was sitting in my hotel room when I got a call from downstairs, the reception, and the leader of this conference called me and said, "Al," he says, "I've got a problem here. I don't know how to deal with it." He said, "Can you help me?" I said, "Well, sure. What's the problem?" He said, "Well, I got a bunch of people here, and they will not register their names or where they're from. They won't tell us anything. They just came, and there's a big group of them, and I don't know how to deal with it." He says, "Can I send them to you?" So I said, "Sure." So they came up to my room. It's 20 people come into my hotel room. It crammed in, and so I'm asking them, "What's the trouble?" He says, "Well," he said, and they explained that we're from all over the Soviet Union. This is our first time ever to gather like this, and we have been underground all this time, and we have never ever registered. In fact, this is what they're known as, is the unregistered church, and they would not ever put their names on anything, including a registry in a hotel. So they explained who they were, and they were from all these places, that were where they'd been scattered. And then they asked me, they said, "Well, who are you?" And so I told them my story, told them about my grandfather and how he'd been affected by Ivan Voronayev, the revival. And all of a sudden, they all rose up, and they picked me up, and they began to pass me around the room, hugging me and kissing me, and said, "You're Joseph, you're Joseph, you've come back to us, you've come back to us." And I've come to find out that these are the people of that revival that has been spread around. And this is
Wow.
one of the first times that they're gathering together like this. And in fact, they just started before that time to find each other. And the Lord had spoken to them, said, "Go find those that remain." And so
Wow.
anyway, it was through that we were able to get later teams to all those places and have access to that. So it was a real miracle.
Okay, so your grandfather started moving out. Others went with him. We're still in Soviet Union. We need to get through a generation to where you get born in China somehow.
That's right. So they left that Kozak village and continued to travel, and actually traveled through Uzbekistan, and then they moved on to Kazakhstan,
Now,
and
maybe, yeah,
and
that's
then
good.
eventually they crossed over the Tinshan Mountains, which was quite a feat. But
Maybe we can see the map again.
they crossed the mountains into northern China there.
So you
So
went Ukraine into Russia, Kazakhstan, and then across
yeah,
into China.
so you can see there where Kazakhstan is, and then the border of China there. And so that's where they ended up, right across the border, which is very interesting because it's really part of Central Asia. It wasn't China at the time. This was the homeland of the Uyghurs, who are very persecuted at the present time.
Right.
But this was their homeland, and this was their capital city, Kujia. Today it's called Inning, and they settled there, and they actually lived there for about 15 years. My mother met my father there, who came with another group over the mountains, and they met there. They married, had actually 4 children. Two of them died, but my older brother and I survived. And when I was just a few months old, um, the Lord spoke and said, "You need to leave this place and continue your journey." And so when I was just a few months old, we left. And here's a picture of me with my mother. Um, I was born very, very sick, very tiny, 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 and barely alive. And my mother nursed me as much as she possibly could and kept me alive. She would take my diapers as we traveled and wrap them around her body, put a coat on, and literally dry my diapers with her body heat. And it was quite the journey, but we made it over another set of mountains, and then began a 3-year journey across China. And
So, Al, can we just go back to the last photos there? There's a couple. Yeah, explain who these people are.
this is my grandmother and my grandfather here sitting down, and my mother and father standing behind them. And then this is also a picture of my mother and father on their wedding day, getting married in China.
In China.
In China.
In China, yeah. Okay. All right. Now coming back to the photo of you and your mother, and on the who are you on the right-hand photo there?
I'm the one right there in the middle.
In the middle. Okay.
That's me. It's my older brother above me, and my little sister there with me. And this is the day we arrived in the United States in 1951.
Okay, so in between, there's quite a trip. You started telling us about all the borders you had to cross.
Yes, we were ended up after this 3-year journey, ended up in Shanghai, just shortly before Mao Zedong surrounded the city and was about to take it over. And he and Stalin had made an agreement that any Soviet people would be sent back to the Soviet Union. So that's the fate that awaited us when Mao would take the city. And so because of these missionaries that had found us in this city in Lanzhou, China, American missionaries, they went to work trying to help us then. And because of their help, the United Nations actually intervened and took us out of Shanghai, sent us to Japan, where we lived for some months. And this is just after the war. So this is, barely. Japan is still reeling from the defeat. And then from Japan, we were sent to the Philippine Islands.
Well, before we go there, let's go back to that black and white photo of the large number of people. You have a photo, yes, that one here. There's a story behind this photo.
Yeah, this is in the city of Lanzhou, and in China. It was in the middle of our journey, so it'd be about somewhere, well, a little bit more the northern side, but this is again just after the war. There's famine in the land. It's a very difficult time, and we're kind of stranded in this city. We can't go any further, and so there's several hundred of us there. My grandfather is the leader. Actually, he's the pastor of this group. And one day they're in this building there, and a missionary, American missionary, is walking down the street, and he hears this familiar hymn, but he doesn't know what language it's in. It's obviously not Chinese, and so he walks toward the building, and he comes in, and here are these few hundred people singing this hymn in Russian. And he says, "What in the world are you doing here? How did you get here?" And he asks him these questions. And of course, the story is incredible. But anyway, it turns out that this man happens to be the uncle of Darlene Cunningham, who eventually I meet, and we work together in this mission. And realize
the co-founder, really, of Youth with a Mission, along with her husband Lauren. Yeah,
the destiny behind all of this, just
amazing.
Yeah, but anyway, it was amazing that. He along with these others helped us then to make our way across China and eventually out of China and eventually to America.
Now, you weren't born in that last photo, were you?
In that picture, yes, I was.
You had been born then.
I was a year old at that
A year
time.
old, okay.
And
then you got out, and you got to, the first place was the Philippines in a refugee camp. You have another photo of that.
Yeah. We were put on this little island, which was an ex army base there, and so they turned it into a refugee camp. There are about 1,000 of us there, Russian refugees that are brought in from mostly from China, from Shanghai, and so we made our home there for the next 2 years there in the Philippines.
Okay, so then you went on from there and sailed in under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco on an American warship. What year was that?
That was 1951.
1951. And so you grew up there with your family and a lot of other Russian migrants in that area. And you could have easily just stayed becoming, an American citizen, making money, etc., etc. But somehow you got involved in going back to your roots. How did that happen?
Well, again, I think probably destiny had a lot to do with it. I mean, my parents and many of the others that had made this journey, somehow in their heart, they knew that this was not accidental, that, God doesn't just take a group of people and just speak to them and do miracles and one thing after another, that brought us all the way across there in that way for no purpose. And they kind of instilled within our hearts that there's purpose behind this. And they didn't want us to lose the language. So we were sent to Russian language school. We grew up in a neighborhood that was very, very Slavic, a lot of Armenians, a lot of Jews. So in every corner there's a synagogue or a church with cupolas and everything. I mean, it was amazing. You just in that one neighborhood of San Francisco, you still go there today, and you think you're almost in Russia because of all these Russian churches there. But anyway, this is where I grew up and went to Russian school after our regular American school, and so yeah, that was kind of instilled within us. Not that we liked it, and we a lot of aspects we didn't, and so a number of us rebelled against it, and rebelled against our heritage, against our very, very conservative Christian upbringing. And so we began to sneak out and do things that we weren't supposed to do. We go to a movie and we come out and we think, oh, wow, we're still alive. We didn't get killed for that. So we say, well, let's go see another movie, and that eventually led to worse things until finally I ended up in jail with a group of my other Slavic friends. And it was that night that I heard God speak to me personally, and basically what he said was, Al, he said, "Is this where you want to be? Is this what you want your life to end up like?" And I broke down in tears. I said, "No, God, no, it's not." I said, "Help me, and if you do, I will begin to search for you with all my heart." And I did. He kept his promise, and I kept mine, and that search led me to find a real relationship with Jesus. And it was a short time after that, actually, that I met Lauren Cunningham, and he was recruiting for the very first YWAM outreach, big YWAM outreach in the Caribbean in 1964, and so I ran to the front, said, I'll go. And I went, and it changed my life. And I came back, went to Bible school, and prepared myself for a life of ministry. And unfortunately, my own denomination that I graduated from this Bible school, at the end of my term there, they asked me, they said, well, what do you want to do, Al? And I said, well, I want to be a missionary to the Soviet Union. And they said, well, Al, we don't send missionaries to the Soviet Union. Are you willing to go somewhere else? And so it turned out that Lauren Cunningham was just starting the first YWAM school in Europe. And one of the teachers was to be a man named Brother Andrew, who just come out with a book right then at that time called God's Smuggler. And it had a huge effect on a lot of us in my generation. But little did I, foresee that that this man who came to teach at our school and would have a huge impact on my life. But eventually, he asked if we'd come and work with him, and we did. And that's how we ended up for those few years, smuggling Bibles and working with the church there.
And that's when you met a young woman who also had a huge impact on your life.
Huge impact.
So Carolyn, tell us about your roots.
Yes, well, I'll just be brief because it is a story as well. On my mother's side, they're Germans, and about in the 1800s, Europe was kind of in a low economic state at the time, and they had heard that if you go to the Russia areas, you might be able to work and have land and produce crops. So they went from, actually they were up in the Prussia area, West Prussia, which is today Danzig, and they came down into Ukraine. And it was called Russia then though, but I found out that my family actually lived in the Mariupol area, which I just found that out. I didn't know that, but of course they were under the German names Grunau and Rosenberg and Rivka. And so these were some of the villages where they lived, and they were given about 9,000 rubles to start their lives there. And the one thing they did not want to do is fight. They just did not want to fight, so they were pacifists. And the crown promised them they did not have to go to war for anything. So they established themselves there. They built their own houses. They had no houses, but they had to build their own houses with what they could find, wood, mud. And so they lived there and they farmed the land. And of course, they also were in Crimea as well. So from there, they went to Crimea and they lived in Crimea. The only reason why I would have even known this is some years ago, one of my great aunts passed a note and it had 3 names on it. They were all Tartar names and nobody knew anything about these names. What are they? Well, I began to find out that these were actually towns or cities, villages in Crimea, and they were the Tartar names.
When you say Tartar names, that was the Tatar people who lived in Crimea that Stalin had also exiled.
Right. Yes. Yeah, they did. And some were still there because sometimes they would have raids on these villages and the Tartars would come back and take things from the villages. But anyway.
So these 3 words were place names.
Yes, later they changed them to Russian or Ukrainian, well, Russian, I think. So one was Simferopol. There was another one out kind of in the western part, which was Yutnia. And the third one, today I forgot the name of it, but anyway, and they left, so that my family, somehow it was in the early 1800s where they went to this part of the world. And about the time when the Tartar War started, they left because they would not be conscripted. The Crimea War, which Tartars too. So they did leave, but they went out west. They did not go east. The ones that stayed there never made it out. So my family made it out. They went to the Hamburg area of Germany. 3 times they tried to get a ship. Each time that ship sank. So about the 4th one, they made it, and they emigrated to America.
Amazing.
And I grew up about an hour north of San Francisco.
Okay. Where did you meet?
Called Sebastopol.
It was
Sebastopol.
Yes. So again, destiny, I guess, is still it's very much a part of our lives.
So do I get it right that you actually met at the school in Switzerland that
Yes.
Lauren was studying?
I
Okay,
wanted to go and be prepared to be in missions, and I heard about the school in Switzerland, and I signed up and I went. And so I actually was a little earlier than Al, but our schools met at the end of summer, and it became history then.
so those are two destinies merging. I'm going to fast forward a bit because we need to talk about Ukraine today. You later went to you actually spent some time working with Brother Andrew in Holland with Open Doors. Andrew's philosophy or calling really was to strengthen that which remains. So his ministry was basically to the persecuted church there. But after a while, you began to think, well, why should we only concentrate on the 1%? What about the 99 lost sheep? And so you began to pioneer evangelism, actually, in the Soviet Union time, when that was a dangerous thing to do. And you could tell many stories about this, but this is what has led you. You've been involved in Slavic ministries. You've seen the wall come down. You've seen all sorts of changes. And now this year we see war declared on Ukraine. And you've just been to Ukraine, Al, and you've been traveling around, and Carolyn's been holding the fort at home as you are seeing many people sending in money for all sorts of projects to help. So tell us a bit about what you have seen and what the situation is there right now.
Yeah, we traveled and basically gathered the leadership over Ukraine, YWAM leadership, and met together with them, and traveled together as well to some of these bombed out villages, mostly around the Kiev area that have been liberated now, and heard the stories from these little, mostly elderly people that have been left behind. And yeah, it was heart-wrenching to say the least. But we have been very involved these last months in mostly rescue and feeding and bringing water to these people. Many of them were in basements for months. And the stories are incredible. They would have Russian soldiers living in their house, and they were forced into the basement and given nothing. Some of them went weeks with no food and water. They'd have to sneak out to find a puddle or whatever. I mean, incredible stories that were told. But anyway, we've been involved with this. Sending teams to all these areas and bringing food, and that's continuing even now as more villages are being taken over. There are more people fleeing, and at the same time, there are cities, towns being liberated by the Ukrainians, and those are places where our teams are going and bringing food and help to them. But at the same time, we began to see the people that in these liberated villages that are returning now to their homes, many of them destroyed, and many of them just kind of, no doors, no windows. Some of the roofs need to be repaired. And we realize that winter's coming in a few months, and we need to work fast in really helping the people that are right now either had stayed there, which were quite a few, or returning to their homes. So we have teams right now that are going and repairing homes that can be repaired. And so we have a vision now to make and supply little shelters. We're not calling them homes because the government is responsible for rebuilding their homes, and we don't want to take that away from them. But, the blessing of being YWAM is that we're on the ground. We've got people there right now. And all through this time, we've had people that could meet the immediate need. And the immediate need right now are these shelters before winter comes. And so we want to provide those.
you have a photo of what these shelters are like, that you've been developing this plan, talking with a lot of leaders while you're in Ukraine about how you can multiply and getting ready for the coming winter, which is going to be, of course, with all the houses with no windows or no roofs and so forth. Can you describe the different types of shelters that are going to be provided?
Yeah, one of the and you have to use several things because not one plan will work, and we have to have a lot. So one of the things is that we're contracting with a company in Ukraine to build these tiny homes, and they are tiny, but they do have a little kitchen, a little double mattress, and so a couple could stay in there comfortably. I mean, it's not, again, not a permanent home, but it will get them through this winter and possibly the next 2 winters as well, because we don't know when the government's going to be able to come in to rebuild and all. So these homes are brought to the place and placed there with this truck that you see, and so they're just placed there and ready to go. Most of these villages have water and electricity, so that could be hooked up. The other plan is to build these little structures. It's based on something we've been doing in Mexico and Central America, but they're simple structures, and again, they provide the basic necessities, and so we're hoping to have 100 of these, 100 of these, and 100 repaired in the next few months.
Okay, where are people coming from to do this? Are the Ukrainians themselves doing the project, or do you have volunteers coming from other countries?
We really want the Ukrainians to be involved, and so we're recruiting them, and they're really, already coming in and helping, and we want the villagers as well to be there, but also we want to bring teams in. We'd like to see them come from Europe. They could drive in with a group of guys, and women to come and we're hoping for teams of maybe 5 to 7 people to come in, maybe with a van, whatever, from Europe and or from the world, from the United States. I just talked to a man today from a church. He called and asked, what would make up a good team, and I said, well, some really handy persons. Maybe 5 to 7 people that are willing to come for about 10 days. You could come with your travel time. You could have a good week then. You could probably build maybe about 5 homes while you're there, and so this is the vision, and this is what we're hoping for.
Excellent. And financially, how is it happening? Are you looking for donations?
Well, very much so, and we get a lot of people doing different things. You and I have a friend named Runa, who's a missionary in Romania from Norway, and he just went to Ternopil, bought a little Lada, a Russian car, and he's driving it back to Norway, and he's got 2,000-3,000 kilometers, and he wants every 10 kilometers to raise $10 or 10 euros. And then by the time it gets there, I don't know if they're going to have a raffle or whatever, the car, but he wants to raise, I don't know how many houses from that. That's just one. And we're hoping that many people get that vision. If every church would sponsor one house, or some families can even sponsor a house, and if we could get people to do that, or the teams to come, if they could bring enough money to sponsor a house, that would do it. And so we are raising funds for that, and again, we're believing for several hundred homes in these next few months.
How much does a house cost, Al?
Well, the little house that you saw, the tiny house, they run about $4,000, or close to euros too. And then the other ones, they're a little bit bigger, and they actually sit on a cement slab. So it's a little bit. It's still not permanent. It's still just a temporary shelter, but they run anywhere from $5,000 to $6,000, and that's with a bit of furniture and a stove and these things included in it.
And they're trying to get the products from you.
Okay, so for those who'd like to be able to know how to give, there's going to be the information at the end of our talk here. Now let's we've talked a lot about the past, a bit about the present. I know that there's so many stories, Al, that you could tell, and I've heard some of them, of your current trip there. I mean, well, just for one, we read in the papers just a couple of weeks ago about the rocket attack on Venezia. You were just there a couple of days before. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we have a wonderful team in Venezia. They're mostly orphans that were taken in by the family that founded the base there, that have been raised up, and these are all full-time YWAMers now, and they're running the base, and they're very involved in all the refugee work there. And so we had a wonderful time with them, encouraged them, they encouraged us. We were able to provide a vehicle for them, a van, to distribute the food and all, and here, they're taking us on a walk, and at the end of this one road, there's this statue of this airplane going up in the sky, and then I get home, and it's a couple of days after we've been there, and here's this picture of this square, and this building totally bombed out, and yeah, it was just the saddest thing, because it's Venezia is a way in the western part. It's a place where a lot of people fled to because there's no military significance to it. It's a very safe place. No reason why it should have been bombed. And the bomb building the missile that hit it was a clinic, and so a lot of them were doctors and nurses and people that were visiting the clinic. So it was a sad thing, but it happened just after we were there.
Now, we've also read a lot about the travesty of Mariupol and people having to flee there. You met a number of people from Mariupol in Ternopil. Tell us about that.
Yeah, they just their story is amazing too, because they literally, it was like the coal mine story. They literally heard God say, "Get out." And people are saying, no, nothing's going to happen, whatever, and the leader, Andre, is a young guy that's managed to pull together a whole bunch of skateboarders and, kids that are on the streets. And he was discipling them. And basically, he managed to get his family and a bunch of these kids on a train. And just as they're getting on this train, a bomb blew up just behind them, and it's a miracle that they're alive. But they got to Ternopil. Now they're very involved there, and he and his group, and then through the last period of time, people have been coming through there, and
Refugees.
Of course, refugees there, and they're mostly moving on west or to other countries, but a lot of them, we're seeing what these guys were doing, and these are just kids, and they say, well, we want to help you. So a number of them have stayed on, and they would just take part in the worship times and prayer times there, and they're getting saved left and right. Well, as we were just there, they're just so excited about starting a discipleship school, and they have about 24 of these people that are just have come to the Lord, and just so hungry for discipleship. And so they just started this week with the school there, and I mean, we're so excited for them. But this is the thing that's happening aside from the war. There is a tremendous hunger among the people. They are open to the things of God. They were talking to an old man. His house is bombed, and he said, I was an atheist, he said, and I believed there was no God. He said, after this, he said, who else is there to turn to? He says, I'm no longer an atheist, you know. And then I think many people in the country are reflecting this, you know, just they're finding God in the midst of the atrocities, of the difficulties, and so we're trying to find ways. Right now in Poland, we're seeing just tremendous openings there, and we're thinking long term. Some of the housing that we're making available to the refugees, we're looking long term, seeing these as YWAM bases that eventually, whether it's these refugees that we're going to disciple or the Polish people, I mean, we have the potential of 2 or 3 new bases just in Poland as a result of this refugee crisis.
So you're talking about you were in Poland, and
Yeah.
and that was really ministering to many Ukrainian refugees in Poland, right?
Yeah, family camp that number of Ukrainian refugees and yeah, it was a tremendous family camp that they came together, and we had a wonderful time of ministry to them. And by the way, these are going on all over right now. This week we have one in Slovakia going on right now. Same thing. It's Slovakians and Ukrainians there. We have there's a couple going on in Ukraine, and so we've never had the kind of family ministries and the opportunities as we're having right now. Just Carolyn and I were sitting on our porch this morning talking about our old age, you know, that we should be retiring. We should be, you know, just, slowing down. But we just said, you know, we've never had the fruit that we're having right now, and the ministry that's pouring forth as we're having in these days. And I might add to that the same thing is true of Russia too. You know, many people are looking them as the enemy and love to see a big bomb just fall on the country. We don't want to see that happen. We want to see both Ukraine and Russia liberated, set free, you know, and we need to pray toward that end. But the same thing is happening in Russia. The people of Russia are open to the things of God. Churches are full. Pastors are reporting that people are coming in, getting saved left and right. Our YWAMers are experiencing growth that we've never had. We just had an outreach, summer outreach. 90 young people went to some of the most closed areas or unreached areas of Russia, and just came back with reports of what God is doing, amazing things. And so these are the times that we're living in, and we're looking for the future too, is that the liberation of Ukraine and Russia, and evangelism and the word of God to go forth like never before.
Well, Alan, Karen, I think that's a very hopeful place to wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll keep praying for you in this very strategic role. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, don't go away, because we're going to show you the information as how you can get involved in supporting this house program as well. And just one last notice, and that is our Summer School of European Studies is going to be starting the last week of August in Brussels. It's going to be a very full, exciting program, learning so much about how God has been at work amongst the nations, and also how to understand what's going on there in Brussels. We're going to meet people like Erasmus and William Tyndale. We're going to go to Waterloo and discover how this was such a shaping event for Europe over the last 200 years. We'll visit the Parliamentarium and the institutes of the EU as well. So Professor Eva van der Pol and I will be sharing in the lectures there, and we'd love to see you there in Brussels. And next month, we're going to have with us Dr. Ben Richards, who is an expert on climate and environment. He is the coordinator of the YWAM initiative of Creation Care Hub. He's based in Paisley near Glasgow in Scotland, and was very much involved in the climate conference that was held there recently. And so he's going to be helping us to navigate eco-anxiety in Europe. He was with us online in Paris when we had our State of Europe forum there in May, and he's somebody well worth listening to. That'll be the September the 9th at 6 p.m. So hang in there, and we'll put up on the screen the contact details for how you can be involved in this project in the Ukraine. But I'm going to sign off here and say thank you very much for joining us on this month's Schuman Talk.